Now to the myth of the day. The Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited was unveiled in Abuja this week by President Muhammadu Buhari. What this means is that with the transition, the government will no longer have control over staffing and other aspects of the Nnpc. Johnson Chukwu joins us from Lagos to discuss the significance of the transition and what it means for the oil industry and for the economy. Hello, Mr. Chukwu. Thank you for coming on the program this morning.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Good. Let's have your perspective on the transition of the Nnpc. What does it actually mean?
In summary, it means that Nnpc Limited is no longer a corporation, which a corporation was basically an entity of the government, set up the government for the interest of the government. In that instance, Nnpc Corporation, or Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, was basically under the control of the government. As a limited liability company, Nnpc Limited will now be subject to the rules and regulations or the instant laws as captured or enunciated in the Companies and Allied Matters Act. So it has to conform to the demands and the requirements of every other private limited liability company. What that also means is that it will now have to be to comply with certain level of corporate governance standards, one of which is that they must have its board meetings. The board must be properly constituted. The board must meet at the minimum of 4 times a year. The board committees must meet to dig into different facets or segments of the business operation of Nnpc. And it should have an annual general meeting at the minimum once a year. And possibly, if he has to take critical decisions, he will have, and those decisions are falling outside this annual general meeting, it has to call the meeting of shareholders, what's called the extraordinary general meeting. So those are some of the requirements that you must comply with. And that also means that it has to have transparent financial reporting system, render its accounts to the shareholders, in this instance, you and I who are Nigerians, given that currently it is owned 100% by the Ministry of Finance Incorporated. But subsequently, Nnpc Limited will be a listed company, will now have shareholders, including Nigerians and other non-Nigerians. We now have more diverse directorship. Directors will now be elected by shareholders at the general meeting, and directors will now appoint management that will superintend the daily affairs of the company. So we are going through a transition. I think the most critical thing is that the framework, the legal framework under which Nnpc operates has completely changed and is now a private limited liability company.
So does that translate to more efficiency in the operation and provision of energy for Nigerians, particularly the disappearance of the queues on the streets?
Yeah, ideally it should. And I mind my words, I said ideally it should. It's not an automatic process. But the basic thing we have to know is that private limited liability companies have different incentive systems or different motivations. Public entities, the motivation for public entity employees is different from the motivation of private entity employees. Public entity employees are largely motivated by social factors. Private limited liability companies are motivated by value creation. In that case, if you, as an employee of a private company, which is what Nnpc Limited is now, you need to be efficient, you need to be effective, you need to meet your performance standards for you to retain your jobs and for you to get paid. Unlike public entities, where whether you work or not, sometimes there is this allocation coming from a budget allocation coming from the government, so you end up earning income even when you're not working. But private company is not the same thing. You must earn your salaries and wages. You must be paid from the contribution of value you have created, which is why private companies are expected to be more efficient in terms of utilization of resources and in terms of value creation. And that is what we should expect from Nnpc going forward, because it's now a private limited liability company. It does not expect any handout from government. It must create value from which remuneration will be paid to the employees, and it must create value that are commensurate with similar institutions in the same line of business elsewhere in the world that they are creating, given the same level of resources. So what that means is we should expect naturally a high level of efficiency or effectiveness in the discharge of their functions.
Well, The information we have is that the new Nnpc will no longer remit into the Federal Account Allocation Committee, talking about FAC. If that is true, is there no need to worry about revenue and salaries?
Okay, let me probably explain that issue of the whole remit to the Federation account. Basically, Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation was an agency of government that were managing the assets, particularly oil and gas assets of the government, which means they are oil fields, oil wells. We are also the ones representing the government in all the production sharing agreements or the joint venture agreements. So what will happen is that they will own their own assets, which means some assets, some oil and gas assets, some oil fields will be given to them, which I think must have been done in the process of allocating assets. For those assets that belong to them, they are supposed to pay the government signature bonus to own those assets. They are going to comply with every other condition, every other oil company comply with to own those assets. And then when they make profit from their operation, they will not pay dividend to the government. But if they are assets that are still owned by the Federation, and they represent the government in managing those assets, they will only get commission for representing the government managing assets. And then whatever proceeds that come from the sale of the revenue generated from those assets will still go to Federation account. So I think there has to be a structure that will allow for that transition, because I don't think all the oil and gas assets that we have previously managed or where they were representing the government will now have been fully passed to Nnpc. If they are passed, Nnpc will also be required to have paid signature bonus for those assets, which would have gone to Federation account. So that, I think, is what's going to happen during the transition period until we get to a point where every asset, every oil and gas asset is allocated or assigned to operators, Nnpc being one of those operators, and from which they will pay signature bonus. And for NNP that's owned by the government, when they make profit and have their profit audited, they will pay dividends just like LNG, the liquefied natural gas, LNG is currently doing, and paying dividend to the federal government.
Well, thank you, but we understand also it's a transition, and for real, we shouldn't expect immediate impact. But what's the time frame for us to begin to look at paying a little amount for petrol, more so that we have crude here? Are our refineries going to come up immediately, or is it going to take time as much as it should?
Well, on petrol subsidy or price of petrol, like you rightly pointed out, that will come when the refineries come up. And when the refineries come up, there are costs that are currently incurred in the importation of petroleum product that will be eliminated. Talk of issue of logistic charges, the depot fees, depot charges, vessel charges, insurance charges you pay for those vessels, and then there are higher costs of labor where those refineries products are refined. So you're going to eliminate certain costs when we begin to refine locally. I did mention the issue of freight. You pay freight. The product you get here, they would have ended building to freight. They paid to take the crude to Europe or Netherlands or any other place where you refine, and the freight they paid to bring it back to the country, that will be eliminated. Two, with the insurance is paid to take it to there and take it back here. There are logistic costs paid in terms of jetty fees and sometimes demurrage that are incurred in the course of these processes. That will be eliminated. You end up with a price that is currently, that will be below current cost of landing of products. But that will only come up when the refineries are built, or when new refineries are built, or when current refineries are reactivated. I don't think it to be an easy thing to reactivate the current refineries. And I do not even recommend that Nnpc Limited invest its money in trying to reactivate the refineries. If they have money and they want to focus on the refining, they should build greenfield refineries. So it's only when we have the refineries come up that we should begin to expect to get the benefit of having a crude here, because we don't have to incur the cost we are incurring currently to bring in the refined petroleum products to the country.
Well, thank you so very much, Johnson Chukwu, for sharing your thoughts with us at this particular point in time.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Moving on, we now have